Deception and lies. That's what Toldot last week and Va-yetzei this week are full of. Is that our background? I mean, talk about leaving your laundry out on the line, you know, your dirty laundry for your neighbors to see. Esav loses his birthright. How? He comes in hungry from the field, and he sees Yaakov, or he smells the stew that Yaakov is cooking. Some people say this red lentil stew. And he says, I'll give you anything for the stew. And Yaakov says, okay, give me your birthright. And of course, Esav agrees. What is this all about? What kind of story is that? You give up your birthright for stew? Or are you that hungry and your brother knows how to, you know, get you and hit your points of weakness? I don't know. I think they're both guilty, right? A little bit. Isaac's blessing of Yaakov. Isaac wants to bless Esav. Esav is the guy that brings him the meat, that brings him the stews, the hairy one, the man in the family. So for a little piece of lambskin that was, taped or whatever to Yaakov's arm so he would feel like Esav, he steals the blessing from Esav. And Isaac blesses Yaakov. It's crazy. I mean, that's not the way I want to live. I guess in the Middle East it was a little bit different. And Rebecca had a big hand in this, by the way. Then we have Lavan's trickery of Yaakov. And people say, oh, tit for tat. See, Yaakov tricked Esav. He tricked Isaac and Rebecca. So now Lavan's going to trick Yaakov. And he does. A lot of trickery. And in fact, not only does he trick him into working for 14 years for these two girls that he wants to marry, his daughter, Lavan's daughters, but he gives him the wrong one. The older one, of course, according to him, the right one, but not the one that Yaakov loves. Is that good for the girls? Is that good for him? I don't think so. Remember, Leah says she's hated by her husband. And now that they had their first child, now he'll love me. What kind of marriage is that? And then he marries Rachel after another 7 years and really loves her. And then they run away. And he, through trickery again, by animal husbandry, figures out how to make his flock of the spotted and the speckled sheep huge. Much, much, much bigger than it would have been. Is that stealing? I don't know. Maybe some people would think it's thinking on your feet. In any case, he makes his big flock, and the two girls and he run away from Lavan. The two daughters of Lavan run away from him? What does that mean? Well, he was a cheap guy, and he was a mean guy, and he didn't care about his daughters, or else he would have let some of the wealth that Yaakov had built up for him over the last 14 years trickle down to his daughters. But he didn't. It made for a very, very bad, dysfunctional kind of family situation. So, as I was reading this, by the way, there's a lot of rabbis who will answer your questions. I'm not he. As I was thinking about these stories and their pshat, I thought about my father Moses Mizrahi, and his brother Alberto, who were also tricked. In fact, a lot of Jews were tricked. The Nazis came into Greece in 1944, right before Passover, Pesach. And they asked the families, they had gotten a list of the families, they asked the families to send someone down to the synagogue to collect matzah for Passover. He took his brother Alberto, after whom I'm named, with whom he was inseparable. They went everywhere together. He took him down to the synagogue. Well, matzah shmatzah, there was no matzah. The trucks went down Melidoni Street, which is the synagogue street in Athens. They herded all the Jews, and it was mostly the young men of the family that went down to get it anyway. They threw them all in the trucks. They took them straight to the train station, and they took a nice 10-day trip. Imagine, by the way, the Jews of Eastern Europe who were taken to the concentration camps did not live a good life, and they were massacred just like everybody else. But the Jews of Greece had to be in that cattle car, standing, no water, no nothing, for 10 days. I mean, many of them didn't make it to Auschwitz, and then there was some metzia to end up in Auschwitz. He and Alberto ended up in Auschwitz. That was trickery. That was terrible trickery. My father survived. Alberto did not. My mother, on the other hand, was in Greece, and she was hiding with her mother and her sister and her sister's family. And her Barba Sideri, her uncle, and my great uncle, with whom I liked, decided he wasn't Jewish. He decided he was going to marry her to a non-Jew to save her from the Nazis. Well, you know that doesn't work, right? But he didn't know that at the time. My mother was 20. She had nothing to say about it. Remember, this is almost the Middle East. It's Greece. Her brother, Victor, who was only 15 years old, came out of the mountains and with submachine guns and two of his friends went upstairs and abducted my mother from the ceremony. There was no ceremony. They abducted her from the room. They took her to some friends, and they hid her and the family for the rest of the war. The problem was that Eleftheria Kurelis, with whom they were hiding, one of her neighbors said to the Nazis that, I think there's Jews in that building. There's too much laundry outside. So they came and knocked on the door, a Judenhaus, you know. And they're all standing in the kitchen, the entire group. And Eleftheria Kurelis, this wonderful woman who I met much later in life, she lives in Philadelphia, she's in her 90s. She says to them, Jews? What Jews? My mother, my sister, my aunt, my grandmother? And saved them that way, if you can believe it. They walked out, they said, we don't want to see, you know, that kind of thing. And of course then my mother and family had to move to another house and be hidden there. And they were hidden for the rest of the war. So what dream do you think my father in Auschwitz and then Birkenau as a Sonderkommando, which is another total story, dreamt at night, if they ever had sleep, when they got to sleep? And my mother in her hiding, what did they dream? Did they dream of this wonderful ladder going up and seeing a hole that was the gateway to heaven? I don't think you can do that when you're in the midst of hell. We live in a country where we can dream anything and do anything. We're free. We're free to worship. In fact, we're encouraged to live a Jewish life without restrictions. In trickery and deception, someone suffers. Almost always. So my message, I think, from this parsha is that we should be diligent and forthright in our actions and dealings with man and God, so that apathy, complacency, those things that might lead us to trickery and deception do not become our common goal.
La comida la mañana, la cadena trae cuadras, que lo sepa la mi madre que yo quiero desposar, que lo sepa la mi madre que yo